Thank you. We are welcoming Jennifer Arnott to give what I am sure is going to be a very informative presentation. Jennifer has been the research librarian at the Hayes Research Library at Perkins School for the Blind since 2015. She answers questions from curious people ranging from fourth graders to academics, and she's always looking for more ways to make information available and accessible. Prior to Perkins, she was an information technology librarian at a small college campus and a library assistant and teacher librarian for high school students. So has a broad range of experience here that we're fortunate enough to tap into. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. I will turn on the slides. As my bio says, I've been at the Perkins School for the Blind since 2015. Mostly what I do is answer questions from Perkins and around the world about current best practices, Perkins history, blindness, deaf blindness. But I've also done several presentations with my colleagues in the Perkins archives about making materials more accessible. So we're drawing on that here. And besides my professional life, I have been online since 1994, which is going to be relevant in one piece. And I've been working on various personal online projects, technology systems, things like that. So I've seen a lot of stuff go by. When we talk about doing alt text, and I'm going to define that in a second, images online are in so many different places, and part of what makes them complicated is there's so many different sites. They have different varying tools and options. Instagram now has alt text, but that wasn't true for a number of years. So you had to figure out workarounds for it. They have different character count limits for how much alt text you can put in. They have different places you put it. You know, how does it work? How do you get to it? And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of different contexts. The way that you might write alt text in a formal academic article is different than a website, even a professional website, is different than a social media or how you're doing it with friends and family. And while there's been a lot of commentary about generative AI tools and whether or not they can provide some accessibility functions, a lot of them are really bad at context or what's important. They basically only get the context if you feed them a lot of data about what the image is. I've seen some very cool applications of that. I have a regular call that includes somebody from the Described and Captioned Media organization, which provides accessible media for K-12 students. And they're doing some really cool stuff with take a screenshot from a video and it uses the video's metadata plus what it can identify in the screenshot. Or the still to give a description to kids who can't see it. But it takes a lot of training and there's a lot of potential glitches there. So this is going to continue to be a thing that humans need to think about and humans should think about for a bunch of reasons other than accessibility for people who are blind and visually impaired. So what is alt text and what is image description? Alt text is attached to a specific image. For those of you who are code designers and geeks, it is part of the image code that goes with displaying that image on a particular page. These days, that's often very invisible to most users. You put a thing in the alt text attribute and it puts it in. But back in the dawn of time, we had to like type the code ourselves. Image description is a more general term that can either be an image that is described in the text, or it can be a description that is attached to an image in some way. So that includes alt text, but it can be other things. Both give context to readers who need it. This, we often think about it as being about visual impairment, but that was not the original intention of alt text. It also helps people who need plain language descriptions, people who are non-fluent readers of whatever language you're writing in, and people who are lacking specific context for humor or science. It's also about providing image access for people who have limited data, who are somewhere where everything's very slow loading, or remote areas. I spent 4 years living in rural Maine, and unless you were right in town, internet access was not speedy, and that was 10 years ago. You'll see up here that I have a still from an animated movie, The Road to El Dorado, and it's a screen capture from an animated GIF in which the two characters look at each other. What it says on the screen right now is both, with a question mark. And if I turn this into the animation, they would look at each other, nod, and say both is good. That's the real thing I want to bring to you when talking about alt text and a lot of other accessibility tools. They're really essential for people who have specific needs, but they're actually really helpful for everybody else. Um, if I am not well up on most of my, pop culture stuff. So when I see a GIF go by in, social media feeds, half the time I know what they are, and the other half the time I'm like, I don't get this. Explain. And alt text can actually give me the data that I need to understand not only where is this coming from, like people will name the show or they'll name, whatever property it comes from, but it will also often help me figure out like how they're using it. Are they being ironic? Are they being sarcastic? Is this a really funny moment? It gives me enough information I can go find that if I care about it, which I really appreciate. So a brief history, alt text has been part of the internet since 1993. And the original goal, as I said, was not visual impairment and accessibility. It was to get text pages to load faster. I got on that line the next year, as I said. This was back in the dawn of time when it was exciting that our web pages were something other than pale gray for a background. And a lot of people were relying on dial-up. A lot of people were relying on, you would call into your local BBS for 20 minutes, tie up your phone line, download everything, and then look at it offline. And so having something that could give you what the content of an image was so you could decide if you wanted to load it really mattered. It continued to matter when we didn't have high-speed phone access. These days, we're doing a lot better at that, but it's still really useful in some cases. Alt text became required for image and area tags in HTML in 1999 with HTML 4.1. But throughout its history, it has been often ignored. It has not been taught as part of coursework on web design, and it's often not explained. So a lot of people are, they might include it, but they do it badly. And we'll talk a little bit about what badly looks like. Or they just don't include it. So there are three kinds of image we want to talk about here. And conveniently for our purposes, one of them is really simple. Which is purely decorative. We're then going to talk about images that have essential information for understanding what's going on. And we're going to talk about images that have some sort of layered, complex visual experience. So that's things like charts, but also or scientific images, but also artwork. Things where the artistic expression is part of the image. So we'll do the easy one first, which is that purely decorative images do not need alt text. You may need to mark it in whatever tool you're using to indicate that. If it doesn't have a way to say this doesn't need alt text, you might want to put null if there's nothing relevant. Screen reader users will just skim over that. So what's an example of a purely decorative image? So on my slides, you can probably see there's a logo for Perkins School for the Blind in the bottom left. If I hand this presentation to a screen reader user, they do not want to hear Perkins logo every time we change slides. That's really boring. It doesn't add information. It doesn't add new content. They know we're in a Perkins presentation. So the best practices are usually to describe it once briefly and then opt out of all the later ones. So I might describe it on the first image if I cared. And maybe I don't really care about telling you what the Perkins logo looks like. Maybe it's just not that relevant. You know it's from Perkins. That's the thing the logo is conveying. We're good. Perkins logo, if I were describing it, I would say, I would put in the alt text, Perkins logo, Perkins School for the Blind, Perkins in Braille under the name Perkins, something like that. Which is what those dots are, if you were wondering. Not super complicated. Again, you don't need to hear it all the time. The same goes with sort of decorative, breaks between paragraphs, purely decorative images, things that are just not conveying information in any other way. So next one is visual information. And here I've borrowed an image from your site. It was the image of the week for June 1st this year. And the description on the images page says, the very large array may sit in the New Mexico desert, but it's not always dry. Summer monsoons bring much needed rains, and this lovely afternoon also brought a double rainbow. That is actually not there are some things that I might add if I were thinking about this description as alt text, but by and large, that's a pretty decent description. It tells people who are reading the text what's going on in the image and like why it's there. And also I'm sort of assuming that people who are going to an image of the week page are okay with a sort of more descriptive explanation of what's going on than if this were illustrating something in an article, right? So the alt text provides key details in a brief format. What's interesting? What do sighted viewers learn from this image? what do people using alt text need to know to make sense of it or why it's included? If I were writing alt text for this in another context, I might talk a little bit about there's, a large plane, there's the very large array that's, this white object that I would describe better. But mostly like the rainbows are really cool. That's the thing we care about, put the rainbows in there, front and center. We're going to come back to a lot more examples, but I just sort of wanted to touch on this as an example. And then there's more layered visual experiences. So again, this is an image from your site, which talks about these brightly colored shapes representing astronomical data. And it talks about the different data. So if you're doing alt text for something like this, you really want to think about where it's being used and who's going to be accessing it, right? And you want to sort of tailor the alt text to those needs. Part of this is that what people want in a description is going to vary, and part of this is that presumably some of this is also going to get explained in text for people who, for people who, like me, I'm interested in astronomy. I am not an astronomer. Like I understand that those things are conveying, different spectrographic responses of some kind. They're labeled, but I as a lay reader probably want some explanation of what's going on there and why it's cool, right? So in your alt text, you might describe, there are 5 different images. They have different colors that are conveying different information. You'd probably want to name, that one of them is iron, one of them is nickel, one of them is argon. You might want to describe what the other 2 are conveying, but all of that could be in the main text of the article. And then your alt text would just sort of say 5 images, describe the sort of general layout. That there's several different pieces that are showing up on different images and identify which ones are on which image maybe. But that's going to depend a little bit on how much has gone in the article and how much is going in the alt text. We'll come back to how to do complicated images, but I just wanted to lay out the different examples. So the really simple rule of thumb, if you were looking at an image and you were describing it to somebody who's on the phone, not a video, you can't turn her camera around, or they're in the other room and they're doing something and they're making dinner and you don't want to stop them making dinner, right? What would you say about what made you laugh, what made you react, what makes you want to share it? How would you describe it in that moment is sort of the key that you're aiming at. That you want that immediacy of what is this image doing in this context, in this particular setting, for the person who's participating in this thing somehow, right? If you start there, you're probably going to hit about the right length point. Editing is good, but you're going to get the right sort of general framework. And you're going to focus on the things that are most important for that image in that place. Of course, it's not quite that simple, so we're going to talk about a lot of other details. So how long should your alt text be? It depends on the site and the context. Site limits on various social media sites and various other tools range from about 100 to 1,000 characters, which is not very helpful in deciding how long this should be. 100 is really short. I find it very hard to do more than super brief alt text in 100 characters. Under 250 is, the range of a tweet equivalent. It's a couple of sentences usually. You can't waste words, but it's, you've got some space to do a decent description. And then if you find that you need a longer description, you need to do a transcription, you need to do a detailed image. That can either go in the text of the post or it can go in a linked image description that somebody can access if they want to. Those are usually the best practices. So what do you want to include? We're going to talk about each of these directly. So this is just where we're going in the next few slides. We want to talk about the type of image if it's relevant, who's in the image, the expressions that they have, a description of what's going on, color, which a lot of people have questions about when it comes to alt text, and then if there are interesting features. So type of image. Is it a chart? Is it a diagram? Is it data? Is it a scientific image? Is it an antique photo or watercolor? Do not just say image. That part will be obvious. A screen reader is going to say image, whatever. You don't need to say image again. If there's nothing interesting about the type of image, just launch into describing it. So, I probably would say photo of, caricature of, sketch of, but you could also just leave the photo part out because people are going to assume it's a photo and just say, what the image is. Helen Keller with a dog, which is the example we're going to use for some things in a minute. You know, sometimes the type of material is very relevant. Like if it is a watercolor or it's you know, a daguerreotype or you know an etching, like that is relevant information about the image. You don't need to get too hung up on it. The other thing about saying the type of image early is it prepares people for the kind of data they're about to get. So if you say chart, people are going to say, oh, there's going to be a lot of complicated description coming. I should be aware of that. If you say, you know, photo, they're gonna be like, okay, I'm getting an image description, fine. And it lets them sort of align what they're about to hear more usefully. Who's in the image? This one is simpler than most people want to make it. Is it a famous person? Is it somebody whose appearance is already discussed in the text, or somebody who, like, you haven't even discussed their appearance, but like the relevant part is in the text? You can just use their name. If something's different, like they're at a costume party or a gala, or they're like their clothing is very relevant, or they've dyed their hair, then you can describe the variation from the usual appearance. You might want to include description. It might not be relevant. This is a case-by-case thing. We'll talk through some examples in a minute. But things that you might want to consider are age range, hair color, race or ethnicity if known, or skin color. And we're going to come back to that one. A lot of people are nervous about it. And maybe their general body type. We're going to talk in a minute about you want descriptions in alt text to be neutral. So, you know, there are some considerations about how do you describe somebody's body in a neutral way. Do you need to describe their body? Sometimes you don't. Often you don't. Often it's just enough to say, this person who we've been talking about in the text is, you know, doing this, right? Their name, what they're doing, everybody's good. What's their expression? Are they neutral? Are they happy? Are they stressed? Are they smiling? What emotions are relevant to the image and how it's used? And we're back basically to describe it to somebody on the phone. You don't need to overthink this. You can just say, you know, they seems happy, is smiling, is frowning. If you're not confident in describing other people's facial expressions, you can just give the vibe of the image. You can just describe what you see. And hopefully the context of how the image is being used will give the rest of the weight of it. But you know, if you're talking a professional website, like most of our people are pretty neutral. You know, they're in, you know, formal portraits, or they're, you know, doing something in a professional mode, they're giving a presentation, whatever. Like the emotions are usually not the super driving thing. But for example, Perkins just had graduation last week. And so there's a lot of, you know, smiling kids on our website right now and in our social media. And so the fact they're smiling is in fact relevant. But you could also sort of assume that from like, everybody's so happy at graduation, you know, here we go. Description. Besides whatever the sort of central figure or figures or object are, what else is in the image that matters? This is somewhere where sequencing helps. Best practices are usually to start with a primary subject, then work top down and left to right. But use something else if that makes sense. Sometimes it makes a lot more sense to just sort of start somewhere and go clockwise. So clockwise from the top, blah, 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 blah. If there's a row of people, you know, for a formal picture for a group, you know, you go left to right and then left to right again. Maybe you start with at the center, you know, they're honoring somebody. So maybe you start with at the center is so-and-so, and then left to right at the back, list of people, left to right at the front, list. You know, figure out what makes sense for that image. So color, this is one I've always had a lot of questions about. So the first thing to know is that many people who are blind or visually impaired have either some vision or some visual memory. Most people who are blind have at least a little bit of vision. The question is how much of it is usable. So for some people, they see light and dark and some color, but it's really blurry. They have no acuity. Some people, they have field of vision issues, so they might see things at the peripheral vision or things in their central vision, but not both. They might have a very narrow range, like 5 degrees of vision that they can use, so they can see color, but like they've got to be aimed right at that color to see it, or to use the part of their eye that can see. And then of course, some people become blind as you know, children or adults, so they have experience of color in the world, and they have a memory of it, but they don't they don't currently have, color vision of any kind. But for all those people, color might be useful. Some readers won't. The people who don't care about it will just skim over it, basically. And because we talked about alt text being useful for other things, sometimes that color information is useful. And if you're storing alt text, you're storing like an image library and you've put alt text on them. Sometimes, as we find in the working with the archives materials, that sometimes it's really helpful when we say like so and so is wearing a blue dress, because the thing we remember about the photo 6 months later is that it has a blue dress in it, or they're all wearing bow ties. And if that's in the image description in the archives images, we can actually search on that and find the image again, in a way that would not be possible if we were just searching through all of our international teacher class pictures, for example, which is often where this comes up. We're like, I know it was the one where they were wearing bow ties, or, one of the 12 where they're all wearing bow ties. But it's much easier to search on our images and find the 12 images with bow ties than it is to search through everything, right? You do want to make sure that any color relevant information is conveyed in some other way. So if you're rating guidelines or keys or instructions, the best practices are to say, like, you might say, push the red button, but you would also say that it's got a symbol on it, that there's an icon or a word on it, push the red button that says, stop. Push the green button with a play triangle symbol, whatever. Or you put the symbol in the text. So that there are multiple ways of conveying it. That's because some people are colorblind, some people won't view colors, some people will need the alt text on the button to identify the button correctly. You just want to make sure that information is available in multiple formats. So interesting features. This is going to depend a whole lot on what you're talking about, but this can include brand details. It can include some sort of fun detail, like it might already be in the text. Like if I took a picture of my cat, I might use her name in the alt text. I probably want to also use it in the text of whatever I'm describing so everybody can know her name. You might include some additional key color details. You might include other visual details like patterns or designs. You don't have to do this usually. Usually these are nice optional extras. Decide based on the length of what you've got, and sort of what your focus is. And then you want to put your structure. You want to put the first thing the most important thing first. Screen reader users are really good at running through pages with a screen reader really fast. And so usually what they'll do is they'll listen to the first couple of words to figure out if they care. And so you want to give them the first couple of words, like, do you care about this? Is this the thing you want to know more details about? Excuse me. The first sentence should be, a very brief sentence, and then you can do more detail in a second or third sentence. And then people will skip if they don't care. So this is an image from Veronica, who does a lot of writing for Perkins' technology site. She is herself visually impaired. And I really love this image because it's such a great illustration of how to talk about this. So I'm going to describe the image, and then I'm going to talk about how this image is set up. So this is a graphic explaining how to write alt text, titled Writing Alt Text. Each aspect is highlighted in a different color, and they include identify who, expression, description, color, and interesting features. Then there's an image with a description with each aspect color-coded to match the particular kind of thing. The text reads, a capybara, who, looking relaxed, expression, in a hot spa, description, period. Yellow yuzu fruits, color, are floating in the water, description, and one is balanced on top of the capybara's head, interesting feature. Now you notice that in setting up this thing as an alt text, which is a little bit longer because I had to describe some stuff, I made a choice not to use the color terms to match them, because somebody who can't see the color or is relying on that description is going to have to flip back and forth to figure out what green is and what teal is. And these colors are a reasonable range, but somebody who's got red-green color blindness or blue-green color blindness might struggle with some of the specific color choices. Basically, we want to make it easy for them. So doing a little parenthetical of a capybara who, looking relaxed expression is a little easier to process, right? This is such a great image because it does draw in. There's a bunch of different things happening in this image. There are things that somebody who is sighted might not know. Like I don't routinely eat yuzu fruit. So it's nice to know that that's what that looks like, and that's what's going on. Somebody else might not know what a capybara is, so knowing that the creature in the middle is a capybara is helpful. And then you get a little bit of a sense of the image, and then it's got this slight sense of the ridiculous, right? Um, so what not to include? Don't include information that's in the main text. You don't need to repeat yourself. Do expand on relevant visual details that are only in the image. You don't want to give personal opinions most of the time. Something is cute, ugly, things like that. Personal social media might vary. Um, I spend a lot of time on bits of social media where people do pet photos, and pets are always cute, but it's, they usually describe why they're cute right now. And you don't want to use lots of emoji or lots of punctuation in alt text. When I get to the transcription advice, there's a tip for including that and making it visible to a screen reader user, but without making it annoying. So when you're trying to write alt text, where is this text going? What's the context the image is going to be used in? How much of the content is described in the article or the post? Again, don't duplicate it. And then you want to have a style of alt text that goes with the style that you're putting it with. So if you're doing formal writing, you're doing a professional website, you want a clear, unbiased explanation. If it is a website or it's, a project that it has, a very clear focus, you want to focus your alt text on the details that are most useful to the audience. And I have some examples. Social media is a bit more about vibes. You might describe humor. You might sort of go a little bit more out on a limb about the mood or the emotions or the like this is sarcastic, this is like ironic. You know, depends on your audience. So here's an example. We're gonna do this image, and I'm going to talk about how you might edit the alt text for a bunch of different contexts using the same image. So this is an image from the Perkins Archives. And the image description that is in our archival storage of this image, I'll read out. Studio portrait of 10-year-old Helen Keller standing next to her dog. Editorial note, you'll see that that's a very short, like that's the brief summary. It tells people what they're getting, right? Goes on, Keller, a white girl, is facing sideways next to a chair with a spaniel sitting on it, who is likely her dog, Belle. She rests her left hand on the dog's shoulder. Her right hand is resting against the side of her dress in a fist with one finger pointing downward. Keller wears a light-colored dress with a bow in the back and dark button-up boots. Now, I don't know about you, but the first 10 times I looked at this image, I didn't notice her hand. Just gonna say. She did in fact teach a number of her dogs to respond to sign language keys. And that is almost certainly what's going on here. But if you're just looking at the image, especially quickly, you might not notice that detail. This is why we like image descriptions. They can point things out for everybody. So we're going to take this image and I'm going to talk about some different contexts of where you might focus. So alt text, Helen and her dog. We might just do studio portrait of 10-year-old Helen Keller standing next to her dog. Maybe that's all you need. Maybe the context of the article explains a lot more. Maybe we just don't need anything super detailed here. Maybe that one sentence is all we need. Maybe we care about the dog. So we might say in the sepia tone studio portrait, Helen is about 10 and is posing with Spaniel, probably her dog Belle. The Spaniel is sitting on a chair and has a multicolored coat and white chest. And we might have some other doggy specifics here. I did not try to generate doggy specifics, but we might talk about the dog's build, the muzzle, the shape of the head. I don't know. I don't know Spaniels. But additional image, maybe this is in a piece about Helen and the many other dogs she had in her life, which was many, she liked dogs. Maybe this is about spaniels, and we were talking about famous people's spaniels. We would adjust the alt text to go with whatever the focus of the this dog illustrates these features we've just been talking about. I don't know. Maybe we care about the clothing. Oh, let me go back one. The other reason for saying sepia tone studio portrait here is that it tells us we don't have color information about the dog, right? Everything's brown or white. So that is useful information because we can't judge, we can tell that the dog has a multicolored coat, we can see different shades, but we don't know what they are precisely. Presumably brown and black and white, but we don't know which color brown. So that's useful information for somebody who can't see the image. If we were talking about the clothing, we might say in the studio portrait circa 1890, we want to get that date in there because it's going to be important for evaluating clothing. She's about 10, posing with a spaniel. She wears a plain light colored long sleeve dress with a high collar belted with a bow in the back and dark button up boots. Her hair is in curls and ringlets pulled back from her face with curling bangs on her forehead. This has a lot more description about the clothing. And again, it's not a super detailed image. We can't see a lot of details, without really magnifying the image. but we can get in that there's long sleeves, there's a high neck. We can say more about her hair. Maybe this is part of an article that's about children's clothing in the period, or maybe it's about Helen and clothing choices at different points in her life. I don't know. Again, you would adjust, but depending on what else was in the text and what else was being talked about. And maybe we want to talk about disability specifically. So in the studio portrait, Helen Keller is about 10 and is posing with a spaniel. Her right hand is resting against the side of her dress in a fist with one finger pointing downward. She is facing off to the right of the image, hiding the left side of her face. So perhaps the text here talks about the fact that very few images were taken from the other side at this point in her life. One of her eyes, her left eye protruded slightly, and so we don't see photos of her from the left side until she's had it removed as a young adult and uses a glass eye instead. So that might be part of the context of what we're talking about in a series of images. And we might also talk about the fact that she is clearly making a sign that is, like she's doing a thing with her hand that is very clearly deliberate. And how is she signing to her dog, right? So now I want to talk a little bit about specifics, things that people have asked questions about at various points. So text, if you've got an image that is text, you've got a screenshot of text somewhere, start by saying it's a transcript. So transcript, whatever. Write exactly what the text says. Image tools can now get the text for you in many cases. You will need to check and correct the transcription. It's often really bad with like names or specialized terms, but it saves you retyping a paragraph or two. And then you can do a summary of emoji or punctuation strings, especially if that makes the content more understandable. You can say 25 exclamation points or 5 fireworks emoji. Screen readers are actually quite good with emoji, but if you put a long chain of them, it's going to say fireworks emoji, fireworks emoji, fireworks emoji, keep going. Or it's going to say exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, and that's tiring after like 3. You don't need it to say that 25 times. So you can just summarize and condense that into something that conveys that there's a lot and how many, but you don't need to repeat them all verbatim. Specifics of physical description. What is relevant? What is different? What is already identified in the text? To come back to our examples. So in one of the links that I will be leaving you with at the end, the WebAIM page talks about a Hispanic astronaut and names her. The caption already says, as the first Hispanic woman to go into space and later the first Hispanic director of the Johnson Space Center, Arnott is widely regarded as a role model. They point out that the image of her doesn't need to describe her physically. You've already said that she's Hispanic. Her name is already in the text. You could just say the photo is of her and it's of her in orange spacesuit. Like you can just say that. You don't need to get more complicated. You've already identified the sort of the reason you might be talking about her. The image doesn't need to duplicate that. In general, when talking about gender, race, or ethnicity, you want to describe everyone that way or no one that way. Sometimes it's more relevant that you're saying it's a diverse group. It's people from a specific place. It's people in a specific community. You don't want to imply or add information that is not available to sighted users. So just because you, the person doing the alt text, happen to know, somebody's specific identity and how they would identify their, ethnicity or background or whatever, if that's not in the article, don't put in the alt text. This is something where style guides, if you're working together on a professional site, like it's a good thing to have a style guide that everybody follows about how much of this detail you include. My colleagues in the Perkins archives have been doing a lot of work on what is called reparative cataloging and description in archives over the last few years. We do want to know that there are people of color, there are people of different backgrounds, there are people with different visible disabilities in our collections, and partly because sometimes we want to like do a piece about them or do a blog post. But we also know that there's a lot of people in a 200-year institutional history where we don't know or the way that they identified doesn't match up with what we would use for modern terminology. So they have been going back and putting in more information about skin color and visible disability, but we also know that there's a lot of places we don't know, and we're not going to guess that that's bad, right? And we're going to work on the information available from the image itself, sometimes we'll say that we know, like sometimes because we are a school and we do know things about people as individuals, We might say a little bit more because we can confirm that somewhere else. But we try to keep it to what is directly present in the image. So work from what is known from the image or the text, don't guess. You can say things like, what clothes are they wearing? They're all in skirts and dresses, or they're all in shirts and trousers, or they're in a mix of summer clothing. And then for skin tone, usually the best practice is to use neutral descriptions. And these days, the emoji skin tones work really well. So there are examples on the screen: light skin tone, medium light skin tone, medium dark, dark. And there are sort of color guides to help you with that. It's that seems to be a level of detail that gives useful information without being overwhelming, and it's a neutral terminology. Specific situations, charts. Charts basically need more length. You're gonna have to figure out a chart. You probably want to describe the content of the chart in the text of the article in some way and have the alt text just give the visual information. Because again, your sighted readers might need help understanding that chart. So whatever help you give them is also available to people using a screen reader and relying on alt text. If you do need to do a longer description, one way to do it is to link to a separate page that has descriptions, maybe with anchors. Maybe you do you have 3 different charts in a longer page or article. You might do a single page that has all of the descriptions with anchors that will take you to the right one, and you link to the right anchor. You could have a longer alt text description. You're gonna have to play it by ear. You're gonna have to look at what your software lets you do. But always begin with a brief summary phrase. What is this and what is it telling you? The diagram center guidelines, which are in the links I'm going to give you at the end, are really great at like, how do you describe a complicated chart, a scientific diagram, architectural notes, things like that. They have some really great examples and how to sort of think through a complicated image and convey the information in a sensible order. Specific situations, links. This is not about images, but it's still important. One of the biggest things you can do to improve accessibility online is to use meaningful link text. So say something like, learn more about topic by exploring our catalog, or the Hayes Research Library can provide. You can see that the links there are learn more about topic by exploring our catalog is all one link, or the Hayes Research Library as a link. You want to avoid click here because somebody who's using a screen reader, if they're skimming through the links in an article, and they do, you want, like, if you just get click here, there's no content for them about what they're clicking on. If instead the link says the Hayes Research Library, it'll say link the Hayes Research Library, and then it may give them the address depending on how they've set stuff up. But they'll know what they're getting if they go to that link. You maybe also want to think about repeated link names that go to different locations. So for example, we could set up a page where the Hayes Research Library goes to our webpage, but if I'm sending people to our catalog, I might want to make the link, the Hayes Research Library catalog can be searched, blah. So that somebody skimming through, knows what they're getting at the other end. Specific situations, Veronica, who did the guide that I have linked and which I was reading as preparations for this, she has a very detailed alt text guide. She notes that she avoids getting too detailed about location because it can have safety implications. So she keeps it to immediately known places or identified locations and says, if it's a location that I recognize but is not well known, I will avoid including location information to avoid unintentionally exposing the person's location. For example, I would not write the name of a local coffee shop my friend took a selfie in, unless they tag the location themselves or they're standing under a sign. This is less of an issue in sort of a professional website situation, more an issue for personal social media, but I think it's a good thing to think about. And again, don't put more information in the in the alt text than somebody looking at the image would have. So if I'm looking at an image of a coffee shop, there's no sign or anything, I don't know which coffee shop it is. The fact that you know doesn't mean it should go in the alt text. I don't want to do the videos as examples because that's always a little glitchy. But screen reader speed, I wanted to include a couple of examples. And these are 2 fairly short videos, both from people who are accessibility specialists at universities or community colleges. And they both give a good demonstration of what it's like to navigate through a page with a screen reader. Both of these users, they don't mention it, but anybody who's heard a screen reader user, both of these users have slowed down their speed a lot, somewhere between to about 1/10 of what they normally use and about 1/4 of what they normally use. So that people who are not used to screen readers can make any sense of it, out of it. Skilled screen reader users move at a speed that is absolutely dizzying if you're not used to it. They will go through vast amounts of text very quickly, at like 400 words a minute if they're good. That is a lot. And they will also immediately identify if they care about us, but they will flip through, paragraph to paragraph, and they'll go, oh, that's a link. I don't care about the link right now, within, half a second of hearing that it's a link. It's very impressive. It's a really fascinating skill set. But just so you can get a sense of what it's like when somebody's accessing a page with images and links, I wanted to include those for people who wanted to listen to them. So we are now I'm going to talk a little bit about the links that we're going to be sharing, and then we'll have some time for questions. And then if we have more time and people are interested, I have a page up of examples that we can talk about a little bit more, which are also linked here. So resources, page 1. The Perkins Guide, which is written by Veronica Lewis, Veronica with 4 eyes, who's visually impaired, links to many other resources. If you only look at one page, this is probably the one you should look at. She covers everything. She's got a very accessible writing style. She's a screen reader and visually impaired herself, so she's coming at it from that perspective. It's just a great resource. The WebAIM Guide to Alternative Text. WebAIM is a site that focuses on accessibility. They've got a great page about how to write alt text and some very detailed examples. Denise Palucci is a longtime friend of mine. She's also co-founder of Dreamwidth, which is a small social media site. And about 10 years ago, she did a really great presentation for one of her professional conferences about accessibility in alt text. Dreamwidth puts a very high value on accessibility, has a number of screen reader users, both as users and as people volunteering on the site. And I helped her put together the images that are linked on writing alt text. So I'm fond of them. There's a fun range of images. Those are the ones we're going to go look at if people want more examples. But she's got several pages. The basics of how to do alt text have not changed a lot, but the implementation of how you put it on social media has obviously changed in a decade. I also work at the National Center on Deafblindness, which is a federal technical assistance project. They put together a really great set of guidelines on implementable low budget accessibility advice that's designed for state projects that they work with, who are usually like 2, 3, 4 people in a state with not a lot of budget and spare time. So it's a really great guide of how to do this in simple ways. They talk about meaningful links. They talk about how to make different kinds of materials accessible. They include alt text. It's a nice one-stop shop if you're just looking to improve things without a lot of money and, complicated tools. Sorry, my throat is not helping. The Diagram Center Image Description Guidelines has templates. This is the one I mentioned earlier. This is the index of their main accessibility page. Really great for complicated charts and diagrams. The Cooper-Hewitt guidelines for image description are really great for art and also for other complex images. If you'd like more webinars, the DAISY Consortium has done 3 on image description that go into a lot of detail and talk about a lot of different situations. And then these are all my links. So I am done with the screens. I will stop sharing, and I know there are questions. So Brianne says, social media manager, hi. This is the alt text to describe the visual. Love to hear your thoughts. Small radio telescope for sitting in vast desert plains. The skies are gray, but 2 rainbows can be seen crossing the sky. Yeah, I think that's great. You could maybe describe what the radio telescope looks like more, but you don't need to. I don't think so. I sort of feel like this is a know your audience. I sort of feel like people looking at your social media either know what a radio telescope looks like or are going to go look it up and figure it out. But knowing that that's a radio telescope is going to give them the information they need to do that. You can't assume that your readers in various formats have a brain. You could give them clues and give them the vocabulary they need to figure out what a thing is, but you can assume that if they care, they are capable of going and finding out more. Lindell said, mention limited image description, where and how is this done? Depends on your setup. So what we have done with some projects at Perkins is we will set up long transcriptions, more than a couple of sentences. Like there's a letter, there's a long document. We will set up the description. We will set it up on a hidden page on the website. We will link to that page, and then you want to link to get back to the main content at the bottom. How you do that depends a lot on your site construction and what tools you're using. But that's usually, if you've got a longer thing, the best way to do it. And then there are links. Thank you. Yeah, I'm fine with you sharing it. I can share the slide deck with Lindell as soon as I get off this call. I'm also happy if you have questions. I am not an expert on alt text. You know, I do a lot of other things with my job. This is coming very much from a, like, I have to do this myself, and here's what works for us, and here's what we've shared with other people. But I can also pass along questions to other people who do it all the time and are much better than I am. Question, do you have resources to recommend for people designing and building interactive web-based? I think the Diagram Center has some stuff on that, and I can also take a look and see if I can find any other resources. Again, a lot of that depends on what is the underlying architecture of the site. For things like buttons and controls, one of the keys is to have the button label, however that is done in that particular tool, labeled, and also to ideally get testing from somebody who's a screen reader user for accessibility. I will put in a plug here that Perkins Solutions is an arm of Perkins that does accessibility testing and design, and they have some resources on their site, and are also always glad to do consultation stuff. Is it common to have alt text in articles published in academic journals? Depends on the journal, depends on if it's getting published online. More and more are doing some of it, at least. It's often built into sort of accessibility features, or sometimes built into grant requirements, or they're built into publisher requirements. Depends on a lot of factors. Often too, like, there's enough description of the chart or whatever in the article, like you'll have a summary of the chart in, you know, the key points from this chart are X, Y, and Z, which is not a full image description, but it is probably enough for the reader of the article to get it, or to, you know, ask for more. A lot of this is, it depends so much on your context and what the underlying infrastructure lets you do.
Maybe more of a comment. I mean, I don't know if everybody's aware of the tools that are available on PowerPoint to at least evaluate this. So do you have comments or thoughts about the PowerPoint capabilities?
Yeah, so my slides are in Google Slides. PowerPoint has a lot of the same setup. In terms of accessibility on a slideshow, there are a couple of things you can do. One of them is to think about background images, and do they need alt text? Can you just mark them as not an image? Don't, you know, ignore this image entirely. The template I'm using is one that Perkins set up that does that. A key thing that you can do to make screen readers more able to navigate slideshows is to have every slide have a different title. So if you look through my slides, you'll see like resources page 1, resources page 2, resources page 3. That is so that if somebody with a screen reader is using them, they can tell that there's 3 different pages, and, you know, they're in order. I sometimes take a little bit of creativity. Like, I have done plenty of presentations where I'm talking about one thing for like 7 slides in a row. Like I did with the Helen Keller picture, like, but that's like Helen and her dog, Helen and her clothing. You know, there's enough to identify, right? You want to use headers. This also goes for regular text. You want to use headers and formatting for structural reasons, not for visual reasons. And if they're visual, you want to think about how you're doing that. So don't put something in a header just to make the text bigger. That is a structural thing that you are doing. It's going to confuse a screen reader user. And also it's going to confuse like your automated table of contents and whatever else is going on. So just make the text bigger if you need to make the text bigger mechanically. Don't do it with a header. And use the header for sections. The advice on headers is always to, like, you have header 1, header 2, header 3. You might go back to header 2, header 3, header 3, header 3, header 2, header 1. So you don't want to jump more than one level in any direction, unless you're jumping back to the top level, which in a document will probably be header 1. In a web page is usually header 2, because the title of the page is header 1 functionally. This is why this gets complicated. And then you want to make sure that any image has alt text or an image description or whatever, you know, transcription. Yeah, I think that hits all the parts you were interested in. Yeah.
Well, what about the order? I mean, is it good practice to say slide number first and then header and then information? Like, what's the right way to present that?
There's a lot of different preferences on that. I think the Perkins template is set up so the numbers pop first in sequence. But I know people who like having the number last, because like if you were reading the document, you would get the page number last usually. So that mimics the way that you would read a document. And also because at that point it's really easy to just flip to the next one. Like you don't need to hear the page. Most of the time you don't care about the page number. You just care, or the slide number. You just go to the next one, and you can do that when it's at the end of the page without it. But like it's saying, slide 1, whatever, also not a big deal, right? The other thing I would say is one of the best things you can do for accessibility if you have people you're working with who are visually impaired and relying on screen readers, get them the slide deck early if you can. This gives them a chance to go through it. Because screen reader users have one pair of ears, they can't listen to both the talk and the screen reader describing the slides at the same time. Like too much audio information cannot separate. So it helps a lot if they can get the information in advance, figure out what they need to know about the slides, and then pay attention to the presentation. Or you can set up a presentation like I did here, where like I was describing everything as I went, so that they don't need additional information about what's on the slides in advance. Like there aren't charts they're thinking about, there aren't, this is the project proposal that we're making, this is the, the action steps we're going to need from everybody, where they might need to think about it or need to have the list in some form. Like they may take the list and put it in Braille. They might take the list and put it in some format they can use if they have it in advance. This was not that sort of presentation.
This is just wonderful, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Did anyone else have any other questions? Okay. I have learned so much. I really appreciate this. This is one of those things that I always struggle with, when I see that, add the alt text. I'm like, I'm not sure what to do. So this has just been incredibly helpful, and I feel more empowered now to dive into to that and be better about doing it. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think my takeaway is that doing it at all is better than not doing it. And you will get better at it the more you do it. And describe it like you're on the phone with somebody as a starting place. Like if that's what you manage, that will get you 90% of the way there for anything other than super complicated images.
Yeah, thank you. That was actually a very helpful statement. Just pretend you're talking on the phone. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again, Jennifer.
Yeah, and I'll send you my slides right away. So
Terrific.
feel free to share those.
Awesome.
Thank you.